Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At the UFC 282 post-fight presser, Dana White had a shocking announcement. He announced Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill as the main event of UFC 283 for the undisputed light heavyweight title. What a turn of events. And honestly, I'm just shocked. I'm completely shocked. I did not anticipate this. This is kind of out of left field. I'm going to give you guys my reaction and my early prediction for Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill. If you want to see my actual live reaction, I did a UFC 282 post-fight where I was discussing all the fights at UFC 282, and I found out the news about Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill for the light heavyweight title. But in case you've been living under a rock, Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira went down at UFC 275 earlier this year. Jiri Prochazka wins the fight, wins the light heavyweight title, but it was such a great fight, the UFC decided they were going to run it back. We were supposed to get Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira at UFC 282. 2 weeks before the event, Jiri Prochazka injures his shoulder. Apparently, it's a terrible injury. He needs surgery. He needs therapy. He and the UFC decide that Jiri Prochazka is going to vacate the title. Well, the co-main event of UFC 282 was pretty much a number one contender fight between Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev. Well, the UFC decided, okay, we're going to give Magomed Ankalaev a title shot. We'll let him fight Glover Teixeira for now the vacant belt. Well, Glover Teixeira turned down that fight against Magomed Ankalaev and asked to fight in Brazil instead. But the UFC needed a main event for UFC 282. So they basically told Glover, you know, you're screwed. We need a fight. So if you're not willing to take it, we are making Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev for the light heavyweight title. Well, then at UFC 282, you have this fight between Blachowicz and Ankalaev, and it goes to a split draw. And I understand a lot of us want to shit on the judges, and the judges were absolutely horrific in the Paddy Pimblett-Jarrett Gordon fight where Jarrett Gordon got brutally robbed. But in that main event, I don't think a split draw is egregious. I really don't think a split draw is egregious because the first 3 rounds, the second round had to go to Jan Blachowicz. 1 and 3 really could have went either way. So therefore, you could give the first 3 rounds to Jan Blachowicz. 4th round's a clear 10-9 for Magomed Ankalaev. The 5th round could have been a 10-8 for Magomed Ankalaev, therefore being a draw. I personally scored it for Magomed Ankalaev. If you want to check out my post-fight, I'll link it down in the description. But now you have 2 guys who just fought for the title, and we still have a vacant belt at light heavyweight. So Dana White, I guess, in the UFC, Dana White's always saying, I don't make fights on the night of the fight. They ask, oh, what's next for this champion? What's next for this fighter? Dana said, I don't make fights on the night of the fight. Well, at UFC 282, he did. And Dana White made a lot of off-the-wall comments defending the Paddy Pimblett decision, saying Jarrett Gordon threw away the 3rd round, saying Darren Till's stock didn't go down in his fight against Dricus du Plessis. And he also made some off-the-wall comments about Ankalaev versus Blachowicz. Don't get me wrong, Ankalaev versus Blachowicz was not an amazing fight. It was no Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 1. It was not. It was not a terrible, horrific, boring fight. It was a fight of Jan Blachowicz being super technical, brutally chopping the legs of Magomed Ankalaev, and then Ankalaev using the grappling in the 4th and 5th round and almost getting a 5th round finish over Jan Blachowicz. Had he had a little bit more of a sense of urgency in the 5th round, he probably would have finished Jan Blachowicz and been the light heavyweight champion. Well, Dana White hated the fight. He said, I don't know who won. I zoned out in round 3. I get it. These aren't the 2 biggest names, but it seems like Dana, he'll defend, terrible main event performances from Israel Adesanya, and he'll defend other terrible performances. Paddy Pimblett looked terrible in that 3rd round against Jarrett Gordon, but he only criticized Jarrett Gordon because Jarrett Gordon isn't a cash cow. Neither Ankalaev nor Jan Blachowicz are these big stars. So he just shits all over him. It was his fault, the main event, basically was Ankalaev versus Blachowicz, and, it wasn't this crazy star power because UFC 282, there was speculation of John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. There was speculation of other big fights. UFC wasn't able to make them. I get it. It wasn't their fault that Teixeira and Jiri Prochazka didn't happen, but they built this card, and now they're going to complain that Blachowicz and Ankalaev just weren't exciting enough. It wasn't, it wasn't a Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou. It wasn't, I can't think of off the top of my head, but there's plenty of fights that have just been horrifically boring. It was not that. It wasn't, a crazy, wild, action-packed fight, but it was a solid, high-level fight where you had some momentum swings. You had some points where there was almost finishes, in my opinion. It looked like Jan Blachowicz might finish Ankalaev with low kicks. But basically, Dana White shit all over that fight, saying it was terrible. And basically, I think he's pissed. Probably the pay-per-view buys were probably horrific for this card. I mean, Paddy Pimblett, people are saying he's a massive star. Don't get me wrong, he's popular. But there's no proof that carries over to pay-per-view buys. So I think Dana White got news about horrific pay-per-view buys for UFC 282. And he basically taken it out on the fighters. And in a fair world, they should remake Blachowicz versus Ankalaev for the title. Or they should probably do Ankalaev versus Glover for the title. I know, it was still a draw, but I think most people can agree they probably thought Ankalaev won. Jan Blachowicz even said Ankalaev won. So, you could take Ankalaev, make him fight Glover. That can be for the vacant belt. Then the winner of that fight could fight Jiri. That's what I was thinking kind of after the fight. But Dana says, you know what? Screw both Ankalaev and Blachowicz. I am now making Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill. And this is straight up insanity. I mean, now a month from now, we are going to see another light heavyweight title fight. And Jamahal Hill, currently ranked number 7 in the division. He was actually supposed to fight Anthony Smith in March of 2023. So now we have a Glover Teixeira who we don't know if he was still in camp training for a fight. He was supposed to fight at 282, but maybe he was going to take some time off. You have Jamahal Hill who wasn't planning to fight till March. So for me, even though I like this style matchup and I think this is an interesting fight, both guys kind of have an asterisk next to it. If they lose, well, I took this fight on a month's notice, blah, blah, blah. But stylistically, this is an interesting fight because Jamahal Hill doesn't have the best grappling, doesn't have the best takedown defense. He just lost to Paul Craig not that long ago, June of last year, so about a year and a half ago. Got out-grappled in that fight. Since then, he's been on a 3-fight winning streak, finishing them all by KO or TKO. He's coming off a big win over Thiago Santos in a main event, but Thiago Santos has now moved on to PFL, and Thiago Santos was on a losing streak at the time. I like Jamahal Hill. I think he was surging. Does he really deserve a title shot? I don't know. I get the division's kind of in disarray. You have Jiri Prochazka probably not returning till the end of 2023. You have Glover Teixeira who turned down the fight against Magomed Ankalaev at 282. You have Jan Blachowicz who just had a split draw with Ankalaev, so he's going to be out till probably at least spring. Same for Ankalaev. Rakic is injured. Anthony Smith is coming off an injury. Wasn't supposed to fight till March. So next down the line is Jamahal Hill. Jamahal Hill versus Glover Teixeira. I mean, after that, you're getting towards Paul Craig and Nikita Krylov. So this is a weird fight. I never expected that we'd be talking about Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill for a light heavyweight title, but it's an interesting stylistic matchup. I mean, Glover Teixeira is a very good grappler. He has looked very good in his past fights, even in the Jiri Prochazka fight, which he lost. Had that gone to decision, he was going to win on the scorecards. He almost finished Jiri Prochazka multiple times. It was a crazy, wild fight. Glover Teixeira is now going to have roughly 7 months off. He fought Jiri Prochazka back in June of this year. Glover Teixeira is still getting another title shot, so it kind of makes sense. But at the same time, one thing I absolutely hate about this is there's a chance we still end up with a vacant title after UFC 283. Glover Teixeira is getting up there in age. He is 43 years old. He doesn't have much longer left in the sport. He may go out there, brutally finish Jamahal Hill, and he may retire, leaving the light heavyweight belt vacant again. Now, also Jamahal Hill may go out there and just starch Glover Teixeira in the first round. Jamahal Hill has nasty power. He's looked better than ever. He's very lengthy, has good variety of attacks, brutally KO'd Johnny Walker not that long ago, finished Thiago Santos, brutally KO'd Jimmy Crute, has some good wins. Glover Teixeira has been getting hit a lot over the last few fights, even the fights that he's winning against. He almost got finished versus Thiago Santos, got clipped up by Jan Blachowicz a couple times. Glover Teixeira is hittable. His chin is diminished. He's getting up there in age. He's slowing down. He's coming off a war over Jiri Prochazka. So I do think that Jamahal Hill has a chance at winning. And for my early prediction, really, usually when I hear a fight announcement, like I hear Glover Teixeira, Jamahal Hill, I immediately pop into my head, okay, I think this fighter's going to win. With this fight, I don't know. Because I can see Glover Teixeira just taking down Jamahal Hill, beating him up and submitting him, maybe even TKOing him with ground and pound. Glover Teixeira has some of the most vicious ground and pound. It has some of the best top game and control in the UFC. And Jamahal Hill has shown weaknesses in that aspect before. But Jamahal Hill is lanky, has unbelievable power, and Glover does get hit, and he is getting up there where, it's one of these shots is going to eventually turn his lights out. And he's coming off a crazy bore, and he's almost into his mid-40s. This is such a tough fight to pick. But for my early prediction, and I'm going to do a full breakdown and prediction when we get closer to the fight, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss that. But for my early prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Jamahal Hill, and I'm going to even give you a specific prediction, first round KO. If Jamahal Hill doesn't get it done in the first or second round, I think Glover Teixeira wins this fight. But I can see Jamahal Hill just going out there, KOing Glover Teixeira, winning the belt, which, how weird of a scene will that be? Jamahal Hill, light heavyweight champion. Who would have saw that coming 2 months ago? Even a month ago, really. Who would have saw that coming? But the division is in disarray. My preferred scenario would be that Glover Teixeira wins against Jamahal Hill, and then Jiri Prochazka is coming back sooner than people expected, but he's 100% healthy. And we see maybe in the early fall, we see Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 2 for the light heavyweight title. But I kind of want to root against Glover. I love Glover. I mean, I don't know anybody who's going to say anything bad about Glover. I would hate to see him win the belt and then end up retiring, leaving it vacant again. I would hate to see that. As far as the rest of the division, I don't know what Magomed Ankalaev or Jan Blachowicz does. I mean, maybe they run that back in a few months for the #1 contender, but if they run that back, what's the earliest they're going to run it back? Maybe April, maybe May? So the winner of Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill, they're going to need another contender. If Jiri isn't coming back till the end of 2023 or the early 2024, they're going to need another fight in the mid of 2023. So you either run Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev back, and then maybe the winner of that fight fights for the belt, but who knows based on Jiri Prochazka's return time, or you do the winner of Teixeira versus Hill against Ankalaev. You assume him as the winner. Most people scored it for him, and even Jan Blachowicz said, I thought, I didn't win the fight, but maybe I didn't lose the fight. So maybe you give Ankalaev the title shot next. But I would like to see him and Jan run it back and get a definitive answer. The rest of the division, you got Alexander Rakic, who I thought was going to be a title contender. He injured himself in the Jan Blachowicz fight. I don't know what his timeline is to return. Anthony Smith, he's left without an opponent. Maybe you do him versus Nikita Krylov. Paul Craig, he's not even anywhere close to the top of the discussion of the light heavyweight division, even though he's ranked, number 9. That shit-stained performance he put on his last fight was absolutely embarrassing. But at least UFC 283, it was a garbage fight card. I love the main event. It is now much better, and I'm looking forward to this fight card. Now you have Glover Teixeira, Jamahal Hill as the main event, Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno as the co-main for the flyweight title, the 4th fight between the two. You have Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. You have Lauren Murphy versus Jessica Andrade. Why are we putting Lauren Murphy on main cards? I know the MMA gods blessed us because she was supposed to be on the main card of UFC 276. Luckily, that didn't happen. Why is she on the main card of UFC 283? It's unnecessary. You have Shogun Rua on the main card versus Ihor Potieria. I think it's how you pronounce his name. That shouldn't really be on the main card. And then Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker is an interesting fight. But I'll be damned if one of these main event fighters pull out somehow. If Glover Teixeira pulls out or Jamahal Hill pulls out and we see Paul Craig step in or Johnny Walker step in, then the light heavyweight division is a complete debacle and absolutely laughable. But this card is much better now because without that Glover Teixeira versus Jamahal Hill main event, that card was looking very lackluster. I mean, Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny and his hairline in the co-main event. Don't get me wrong, that's an interesting fight. But co-main event? No. Absolutely not. So the UFC 283 card in Brazil is much better. Glover Teixeira gets to fight for a belt in Brazil, which I'm happy about. But the division's kind of in shambles. Who knows what's liable to happen? Who knows? This might end up in a split draw too. And the next thing you know, we're getting Nikita Krylov versus Paul Craig 2 for a light heavyweight title. Who even knows what's liable to happen in the light heavyweight division now? I think there's a lot of question marks here. I think it all determines when Jiri Prochazka returns from his shoulder injury. And then, basically we're going to have this fight. and then we'll have to figure it out from there. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, and thank you so much for watching.